The last speaker of this panel is Alexander Refsum Jensenius. He's a professor of music technology and also a musician from the University of Oslo. I can see Alexander. Thanks for joining us now. I can see him there in the Zoom. His lecture, because he's coming from Oslo, wasn't able to come for the conference this time. But he's prepared a pre-recorded talk, and then at the end of the talk, we'll have he's joined us now on Zoom. At the end of the talk, we'll have a chance for a few questions. So I'll start the video.
I'm Alexander Jensenius, and I'm a professor of music technology here at the University of Oslo, and I'm also director of RITMO Centre for Interdisciplinary Studies of Rhythm, Time and Motion. I have been interested in human body motion for quite some time, and over the last decade or so I've been researching human micromotion, that is body activity, kind of at a millimeter level, and how that kind of changes over time and how it is influenced by various types of factors. And this year I'm running a project called Still Standing, where the idea is that I stand still 10 minutes every day in different settings to try to understand more about what's actually happening in my body in the different contexts and how I'm influenced by various factors around me. This project actually started back in 2010 when I got interested in looking at really tiny things happening in the body. But then we had gotten a new motion capture system in our lab, and we were exploring how we could investigate the body and the body's motion in various types of musical contexts. Now, the interesting thing about micromotion is that this is kind of involuntary and unconscious bodily activity happening when you, for example, just stand still. So that's kind of been a research method that I've been using in many of my studies over the years. So we have looked at how different types of music influences human micromotion, for example playing dance music or meditation type of music, to people. And we've developed a paradigm where we have this kind of championship of standstill, where we have gotten hundreds of people to come into the lab to stand still for 10 minutes at a time. And then we've been playing music to them, but also having kind of control parts where there's been silence, and also other types of sounds. Some of the findings show that indeed we see that dance music does make music move more than other types of music, which is not surprising, but it's an interesting finding still. We also see that music with a kind of medium type of complexity also makes people move more than, for example, if you have a very high level of complexity or very low level of complexity, such as just playing with a metronome. The tempo also matters, so we do see that tempos that are kind of closer to like the 2 Hz resonance, that is 120 BPM, typically makes people move a little bit more than, for example, slower or faster tempi. This year I'm writing up a book about my experience of standing still, and then I also took up a challenge standing still myself every single day throughout an entire year. And the concept is so that I stand still for 10 minutes, I find a spot somewhere in the building, here, like here at RITMO for example, and then I just stand still on the floor. in the project, I'm using a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods to capture my experience of standing in such a space. So I hang my phone on my chest and I collect sensory information from the mobile phone. That includes the IMU data, accelerometer, gyroscope and magnetometer. It also includes information about the light intensity, the loudness of the sound, and also the pressure level. Based on this quantitative data, I will also try to see if I can understand more about my experience of standing there, because also I capture also then my mind and body state and my experience of the space, experience of the interior and exterior sounds, the experience of the interior and exterior visuals, and also how I felt that I moved. Then from this on, I will be able to then calculate various types of features, including the quantity of motion of how much I moved over time. But also other features, like looking at also then my respiration patterns and heartbeats. The interesting thing is that I can actually pick up also even my pulse based on my mobile phone hanging on my chest. And then when I'm done, I will also try to see how this quantitative data correlate to my then experience and the notes I have taken in my diary. Ultimately, the interesting thing will be to see how myself, how I kind of move differently over time throughout an entire year, but also how this kind of can be influenced by the different settings I'm in, and also of course my kind of daily state. So it's a very exploratory project as such, and it's a nice kind of complement to the larger scale studies I've done with hundreds of people standing still in the lab. So I'm still halfway throughout this project, more or less, so I don't have any concrete results to show yet, but there are some tendencies that are interesting to look at, and in general I see that I don't really move that much over time. I mean, in my experience, most people actually stand quite still. And then you also see that it's not so easy to correlate directly kind of the feeling of moving a lot kind of to the data itself. Sometimes I feel that I move a lot, but the numbers don't really show it. Other times I feel that I've stood very still and actually moved quite a bit. So there is not really a direct relationship so far as I can see between kind of the measurable data and my experience of this. Many people then ask me, isn't it hard to stand still? And I wouldn't really say it's hard at all. It's actually quite nice. It's a very kind of good opportunity during the day to kind of relax and kind of just kind of appreciate kind of standing there, kind of taking a moment of kind of relaxation, you could say. Sometimes it's also stressful, particularly when I'm standing in public spaces or places where I know that people will come and perhaps interrupt me. Then I can actually be more stressed. So it's not entirely kind of relaxing, you could say. It really depends on the context and the space I'm in. I've also seen that throughout the year, I don't really get any better. It's not really about training this thing, and that's not so strange because my body doesn't change, so the level of standstill doesn't really change that much either. Some of the most important drivers of the standstill is the respiration and the pulse, and also some kind of just general adjustments in the body. And as long as the body doesn't change a lot, it's not really likely that this wouldn't change so much either. So all in all, this is an exciting project, I think, a very kind of deeply humanities type of project in the sense that I'm exploring myself, my own body, and my experience of the world, and trying to relate this to kind of the more large-scale experimental studies I've been doing in the past. So if you want to learn more about this and follow my project during the year, you can kind of take a look at this, this URL here and follow along.
Okay, yeah, thanks Alexander for the talk. So if someone has a question, I'll bring the microphone and we can turn to him. Anyone want to start off?
Did you notice any interaction with biological clocks? Like if you do it differently in the morning or in the evening?
I'll repeat the question. So the question from Tamar Flash was if you noticed any connection with biological clocks, if you did it in the morning or in the afternoon or evening. Oh, sorry, hang on a second, we can't hear you. Hang on, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can. Okay, sorry, we missed the answer there.
So I'm struggling with hearing you, so I think you need to speak closer to the microphone on your side.
Okay, I'm not sure. I think it might be the... Okay, so the question was if there's a relationship between the measures and the biological rhythm, for example, if it's different during the morning, the afternoon, or the evening.
Well, that's a good question. So the concept now is that I'm trying to stand still in the middle of the day to kind of try to avoid the challenges of, I mean, there are so many factors already involved in this. So so I'm not really looking at the differences in the day. From what I've seen so far, I've been doing some in the mornings and some in the afternoons. I haven't really noticed a big difference. I haven't analyzed it either. I would expect that there perhaps would be more of a difference whether I've been drinking coffee or eating before I've been standing or not. But again, I don't really have data to be able to analyze this, unfortunately.
Have there been significant, I mean, when you checked all of these hundreds of people standing, have there been significant differences between people associated with demographic factors and other factors, maybe physical?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have been doing the championship of standstill for 10 years now, and I've collected data of around 800 people. And in general, we haven't really been able to find very clear differences between, for example, gender and age, nor even height. So what has actually been the most important finding from these studies, where we also then been playing music to people, is that different personality traits. So there are individual differences here, and where people that have been kind of scoring higher on empathy and empathic concern actually moves more than others. That's perhaps the kind of the clearest result we've gotten so far.
Was this also happening without music, or was that a phenomenon associated with the music playing?
Could you repeat that question to me?
The question was whether these findings related to the playing music or if they're also happening without music playing.
Well, for that particular study that we published a couple of years ago, we focused mainly on the music. So since that was kind of the core of that paper, I can't remember right now about the silence, because you're mainly using the silence condition as kind of just a baseline, not really as part of the analysis. So I cannot answer that, unfortunately.
You say that sometimes there was a big difference between the feeling of motion and the actual motion that was perceived. You were talking about the motion that was perceived on motion capture, but I was wondering if you also tried to measure perhaps muscle tension, maybe use like EMG or something like that. I don't know if it makes sense, but just to see if there is some sort of something that does not amount to micromotion, but some sort of difference in muscle activity or muscle tension with people.
It's still very difficult to hear when people are not talking close to the microphone, so not sure if you could repeat it closer here or... I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, you were saying that sometimes people like self-perceive themselves as moving a lot, but it actually didn't amount to actual movement when you were looking at the motion capture. I was wondering if you were checking also some measurement of muscle tension, for example, taking EMG measurement or something else, and maybe something would come out with that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for asking closer. It's much easier to hear. So for one of my PhD students, she did controlled studies in the lab where we had full body motion capture and respiration and also EMG on the neck. And we did see that that people also had different levels of tension than when they were standing there. But we don't have enough data really to say anything conclusive there. So, but in general, there is little correlation in our data when it kind of comes to people's experience of motion as compared to the levels that we see. With, of course, in some cases, it's obvious that people moved a lot when they were kind of coughing or kind of really doing big postural adjustments. But for everyone that kind of just stood still, we haven't really been able to find any correlation there between their measurable quantity of motion and their experience of standing still, which we find to be interesting. It's kind of the mind-body kind of separation.
You chose 10 minutes, but is there any additional data beyond the first minute or the first 10 seconds? Why is it 10 minutes?
Yeah, good question. Well, you know, when I started this project together with my dancer choreographer that we showed some pictures of there from 2010, the first session we did, we kind of just said, okay, how long should we stand? And say, well, let's stand for a while, and 10 minutes, so is that okay? And yeah, and then we kind of just kept with it. So I guess there is one reason for that we have kept with it is that we see that there are certain postural adjustments that happen in the body every 3 minutes or so. So at least then we will be able to capture some of them. And it's also interesting to look at the tendencies over time, kind of whether you kind of raise up or kind of sink down, that we can capture with full body motion capture, and also the respiration patterns where you kind of at least they also change slightly over time. And particularly when, for my annual project now, I'm just standing still listening to whatever is there. But when we've been doing our music studies, it has also been a point to be able to have kind of certain number of musical examples that we can play. So the musical excerpts have typically been around half a minute or so, with half a minute of silence in between. And then you need a few minutes to be able to kind of actually test things. And there are so many variables involved here. So in the beginning, we started out with all sorts of music, but then eventually for the championship, we are kind of focused in on looking at, for example, the difference in tempi and the complexity of music, etc. So we are still running the championships every year and kind of coming up with new things we want to test every time. But it's both an interesting but also a challenging kind of way of collecting data.
Okay, thank you again for talking.